Are you looking for affordable office space in Marion? The Professional Building, located at 685 Delaware Avenue, is the place for you. For more information, call 740-383-6803. Office space is now available. Again, telephone number 740-383-6803. This is Scott Spears, and today I'm joined by a very talented musician, actor, and impersonator, Lynn Roberts, and his co-star, Chuck Carson, who are currently touring the country in the Bob Hope Holiday Roadshow. Thank you both for stopping by today.
Our pleasure.
It's a pleasure because you were here last year. I don't think at that time it was the Holiday Roadshow. What was the show last year?
Last year we did it as part of Veterans Day, so it was pretty much more scripted toward the veterans and celebration of honoring veterans.
You know, the thing I noticed was we got in the car and we had a little car ride over here to the studio. You remember a lot about the places you've been. You remembered a lot about Marion, people you talked to. Does that come naturally? Because I know that's not natural for a lot of people.
It comes naturally if you've enjoyed where you've been.
Oh, good.
And that's one of the nice things about coming to Marion. It's been a city that embraced us from the beginning, and you have a wonderful staff over with Beverly and the people at the Palace and Tom, and it was just always been great fun, and they do an exceptional job on setting the stage and making the theater look really nice.
Now, this holiday season, how many places will you play with this Holiday Roadshow?
This will be about it. We're winding up right now the tour, and we have done it since November. We were in Nebraska and Pennsylvania and Ohio, and so outside of a few smaller gatherings that we'll be doing in the rest of this month, we're about done until January, and we start all over again, heading back into the Arizona, California area where warm weather makes it easier to travel.
Well, it's actually like the Christmas song, "No Place Like Home for the Holidays."
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what we'll be doing this time.
Well, you know, one thing I noticed when Chuck was running down the cities there, a lot of those cities, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Midwestern ties.
Right.
Is it different to play this show in the Midwest than it is to play on the West Coast?
Oh, yeah.
What's the difference?
Audiences are different, and they find different reasons to laugh. I mean, they'll all laugh. Everything will draw a laugh, but some will be more regional in the type of humor that they pick up on. Your Eastern audiences tend to be a bit more sophisticated. They tend to have more reason to remember the old days. And the Midwest is wonderful, but it's like the Bible Belt, so we have to be really sure of what we're saying when we say it. And Lynn does a wonderful job. He knows just how to reach the right people when we do these shows.
Well, a few weeks ago, we did a show. I won't say where, but it was for a barristers club. So we had like 200 or 300 attorneys and judges and their spouses, and it was really interesting because they listened to the show like they were trying a case.
Really?
And they, well, see, yeah, that's funny. It's okay to laugh at that, And then after the show, and I was sweating it because I thought, boy, this is a tough audience. But after the show, we went out among them, and they were just loving it. They were, so flattering and everything on the show.
But they're generally more reserved, and so they don't let themselves go. They're watching the senior partner. If he's not laughing, they're just going to smile like he is.
Well, that begs the question to me, is there a script, word for word, for this show? I mean, I'm sure there's an outline, but is there a script?
Yeah, I follow a script,
Okay.
and then Lynn and I have, when he does his characters, most of that is from memory because it's stuff that he's put together. But we script the show, and everything that I say or read is set up as a radio script.
But always room for ad-libs.
Yeah, we can ad-lib, and we do ad-lib. But it just keeps that format so we know exactly where we are at all times.
I want to get back to these characters in a second because there are so many, and they're diverse and they're great, aside from Bob Hope, but Bob Hope's certainly in there. But I want to know a few things about you, Lynn, because I don't think we had a chance to talk about this last time. What was your childhood like, and when did you realize that you had this ability?
Well, I was found in the woods and raised by wolves.
They're in the tree next door.
I guess.
Actually, I'm an Iowa farm boy.
Really,
Raised on
Iowa?
a farm, but it was a very unique situation because my dad had played with what they call territorial or regional dance bands in his younger years. And he had started a music career playing with his brother and his sister-in-law in a little family band. So then when I came along, and I knew at about the age 5 that I wanted to be a saxophone player. So then when I was about 11 or so, Dad let me get a saxophone. And then I started practicing, and every night, we didn't have television, and then Mom had also learned to play piano at Dad's encouragement when they got married. So every night after supper, we'd go in, and for 2 or 3 hours, we would just play big band style, music. And so when I was 14, I had learned like 250 big band type numbers, and Dad had a call from a country club in Denison, Iowa, wanting him to put a band together and play for their New Year's dance. So I started begging. I says, I can do it, Dad. I can do it. So after about 2 weeks of begging, he finally called the guy back and said, okay, we've got the group together for you. And I was such a hit as this 14-year-old kid that was playing, and I will say this, great tenor saxophone. And the people just, fell in love with me, and they hired us immediately for the next year. So then all through high school, I was in 8th grade at that time, so then all the way through high school I played with the folks, and we would play several times a month at different events around the county and other counties. Then I went to college at University of Nebraska, majored in music, and played with bands in Lincoln, Nebraska and Omaha. And then in the summer I'd go out on the road, and I traveled with my first what they call a sleeper bus band that has an old tractor trailer that's been made up as with bunks and everything. That they were very popular during the 40s, and this was the tail end of that. That was in about 1957, and I did that one summer. And from there, then it was to Chicago and working with more bands. And then the reason I got into doing a show, I'd always been the show off and a comedian for the family. So when we were in Chicago and we were backing a lot of people from the Lawrence Welk Show, I was with Peter Palmer's Voices and Orchestra and the Wayne King Orchestra. Some of your audience will remember that name. He was very a household word. Anyway, I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, I could do an act, and we're backing these other people, and I know they're making so much more money than I am playing in the band. So little by little, I started developing an act and took it off from there.
Mm. I don't have the ability to do this. Chuck, I don't know if you do or not. I can't do voices. How do you do it? Where does Bob Hope come from? Where does Jimmy Durante come from? And how do you know you have this talent? Are you sitting there one day saying, I wonder if I can sound like them?
Well, I guess the funny part of it is I started impersonating neighbors, and we lived in a small rural community. We had a lot of characters to impersonate. Very funny people. They weren't trying to be funny, but they just were kind of a little funny. And so we'd sit at the dinner table, and I would say, I'm impersonating so-and-so, and I'd have the folks just in stitches, and my brother and sister making up the jokes about these neighbors and stuff, or saying things that they would actually say that were kind of strange. And then, of course, I love to watch Red Skelton and all these comedians that I impersonate later when we got a TV. And so I would hear their voice in my head, and then I would just duplicate it the best I could.
When the idea for a show came about where you would impersonate these people, how was that constructed, and what was the idea? Was it to be as close to them as possible? Was it to play a little wide, as I know some impersonators do, or was it to be dead on? Because to me, seeing it seems dead on.
I know a lot of people, they'll say to me, like, after the show, they'll come to Chuck or me out in the lobby, and they'll say, well, where are the rest of the guys? Aren't they coming out? We wanted to meet them, too. And, of course, then we have to confess it was all just me. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I just I become them as my concept is of Bob Hope or Red Skelton or Jimmy Durante or Jack Benny. It's just my concept of them, and in my own concept, I just emote what I feel they were.
If I can interject, Lynn is not an impressionist, he's an actor.
Okay.
And that's what happens. He becomes a character, and he takes over that character until he lets it go and moves back to whoever the next one will be. So that's the impressionists kind of do 3-4 minutes and then they're done, where an actor has to have it all, and you know, he does 15-20 minutes without batting an eye and can continue on infinitum as long as we feed him lines.
Now, see, that's the interesting thing, Chuck, I think, is that when people think actor, the difference between actor and impressionist, they think an actor gets a script and an actor plays that part. Now, it may not be or have been a real person in life, but it's the verbiage is there. Now, they add something to it, but
Right.
it's there. The verbiage is written.
Right.
An impressionist, I don't think it's written. I think they just do it, which gets me back to the bigger picture here. If and I certainly want Lynn to get in on this. If you're an actor approaching Bob Hope, who's a real person, but nobody is writing Bob Hope for you, where does Bob Hope come from?
Well, that's interesting because I've only been doing Bob Hope for about 10 years, but the others I've been doing for a long, long time. And then about 10 years ago, I had an agent in Hollywood say, Lynn, we're looking at your pictures, and you look enough like Bob. We think with a little, the little makeup and a little tweaking here and there, you could really do a good job. And I'd say, oh, forget it. Nobody can do Bob Hope, because I didn't feel he had enough of outlandish traits. But then I had a couple of more agents and band leaders say, you look a lot like Bob Hope. You could probably do him. So that's when I said, okay, I'll work on it. And I worked on him for about a year before I presented it.
What's that working? What do you do when you're working up Bob Hope?
Started looking at lots and lots and lots of his DVDs, videos of his shows, listening to his voice on the radio shows, and finding out the little nuances that he would say things in a certain way, and his certain movements. Like one of the things he was often seen doing, it looked like he was chewing gum, which he was. So even though I don't have gum when I'm up there, I'll do this, and that transfers a lot to the viewer, because they may not even realize they've watched him do that, but it's just one of those little subtleties that will transfer over for him.
And a lot of it too is picking up speech patterns.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and like Hope was known for doing quick one-liners. So if you notice that when we're doing Hope, it's ba 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 boom laugh, ba 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 boom laugh. Then you go to somebody like Jack Benny, who really is a foil. He is there, and people laugh because he's the butt of the humor, but his pacing is much slower. Jimmy Durante speaks in a different pattern. Even though the voice quality has changed, there is another rhythm to Jimmy. So that when I write for him, I write with these people in my mind, and I know the speech pattern.
We talked actually on the ride over here, Chuck, about you started out as an actor and then went into the broadcast industry,
Right.
and now are back, as you say, an actor.
Right.
It's interesting because you use your name,
Right.
your given name, Chuck Carson, on stage. But who is that if you're an actor on stage?
Well, Chuck Carson is a nom de plume, by the way. That's not my real name.
Oh, that's not your real name. Oh, boy, we're breaking ground here
No,
now.
that's right.
Yeah.
It was a name, when I was in radio, the big thing in those days in Top 40 was to give you a name that researchers would go out and find names that they said are easy to remember. When I was back east working in New York, I was Charlie Brown, because everybody knew good old Charlie Brown. And when I went out west, they gave me some names to choose from. One was Peter King, the other one was Chuck Carson. So I said, I like the Chuck Carson. That fits me more than Peter King. So and if you listen to some of the announcers' names from back in the 40s, they were very simple. There were a few that weren't, like Hi Everback and a few of those, but generally they were easy, short names, and so I've used that when I'm doing the show.
His real name is Al Capone, but
Is that right? Really are breaking new ground here today. So Chuck, when you're up there on stage and you're playing the NBC announcer,
Yes.
Who is that? I mean, is that essentially you?
It's a combination of, again, like Lynn, I go back and listen to old-style radio announcers. It's Don Wilson, it's Hy Averback, I did the one that did Fibber McGee and Molly. I'm trying to remember his name. I mentioned it in the show. But you listen to them, and you listen to the way they did their speech patterns. You listen to the old commercials, and there was a way that they were read. Today, we're very conversational when we're on radio and make it easy. But in those days, you were not. You were selling a product, and you were really an actor as a commercial announcer.
You know, something, I saw the show this afternoon before we're taping this, and one of the things I found very interesting was there's a part in the show, just give a small part of it away here, in which Jack Benny's on stage, and,
Right.
and Chuck, you're conversing with him.
Right.
And the bit is to the effect of Jack is giving you a small gift.
Right.
Now, as you're opening up that box, you crumple up a piece of paper as it would be done in radio,
right.
even though this is a very visual show because
Right.
it's in front of people.
Right.
Now, was there a conscious effort to do that even though you are in front of people?
Oh, yeah. No, I made it a conscious effort that if you were watching a radio show in the 40s, that's what you saw.
Yeah.
And you saw when the other bit where he falls off the ladder from decorating the tree as another character. I give him the fall and do all of the nuances that you hear as a sound effects man would have done.
So if there's somebody in the country watching this right now, maybe via the internet, and they want to know what's this show about, what's it like, how would you describe it in just a few sentences?
It's taking a very talented gentleman in Lynn who can become these super characters from radio. These are legends from radio and television and in golden age of film as well. And putting them together into what it would have been like if your parents took you or you went to see a 1940s NBC radio broadcast. And that's what you see. We're up there in front of the mics. We have scripts. We have things. Now, as I said, Lynn has a script, but most of the material is stuff that he's already done. I know the material, but I keep the script in front of me because that's the way the staff announcers were trained and taught. So that's basically what it is. It's a 1940s NBC radio program with legendary stars from the golden age of radio and film, and it's a chance for you to see what it was like and to bring back these wonderful people.
Absolutely, and they are wonderful people. Lynn, I want to touch on a few of these wonderful people. We've talked about Bob Hope and kind of where he comes from in your mind. Who's Jack Benny?
Jack Benny, okay, well, I was raised in Waukegan, Illinois, and they've been so nice to me there over the years. I started playing violin in the Symphony Pit Orchestra for vaudeville, and then I got into vaudeville, and over the years, they've built a Jack Benny Performing Arts Center, and they've built a Jack Benny Middle School, and they even have a statue of me. And a few months ago, Rochester came in and he said, "Look, boss, they're having a Jack Benny look-alike contest." So I said, well, we'll fly back, and just as a joke, I'll enter the Jack Benny look-alike contest. And I came in fourth.
So where, in your mind, where does Jack Benny come from? What is the Jack? Obviously, people can see some of the nuances there, the slowed-up speech,
Yeah.
The gestures. In your mind, is Jack Benny, the Jack Benny persona, the cheap guy, the self-deprecating guy?
Well, yeah, for the purposes of the show. But Jack was actually a very generous guy, and nothing like his character.
Just as a sidebar for Jack Benny, we have a new show that we're introducing in February in Yuma, Arizona, called Heavenly Laughter. The subtitle is Benny Fiddles While George Burns. And it's he as Benny and an actor that we have out of Philadelphia that does George Burns. And so it's another kind of a way to keep these legendary performers alive.
That sounds great. Yeah, that sounds like a great show because of the legendary relationship for people who don't know between
Right.
George Burns and Jack Benny.
Right.
Chuck, do you think in 50 years that somebody's going to be on the stage doing the stars of today, the Britney Spears, the Tom Hanks, the Snookies, the reality television people?
Honey Boo Boo.
Honey Boo Boo, that's exactly right. What are we going to be doing 50 years from now?
We're going to be going back and watching reruns as we do today, because that is really the ultimate of what radio and television and film is like. The stars of today are wonderful, and they have their place and they have their audience, but they don't have the staying power, mainly because there are so many of them. In the days when you had Benny and Burns and those people, there were very few who had made it to the pinnacle, to the top, and that's why they're remembered. A lot of other great comedians. Fred Allen's another. We talk about Fred Allen, who had this ongoing radio war with Jack Benny, and it was it was all for fun. But nobody remembers Fred Allen. He just didn't have that staying power. It was very special. And yet Allen had his own radio show, and he tried television and failed miserably.
I may interrupt. I think in 50 years, they'll probably be more likely they're watching the Carol Burnett show, the Dean Martin roasts, MASH,
right.
Still MASH, and Everybody Loves Raymond, things like that.
What is that line, though? Because I think you mentioned it there with Fred Allen. Why does Jack Benny hold up? I think a lot of people understand why Bob Hope holds up, but why does Jack Benny hold up? Jimmy Durante holds up, but there are major stars who don't. Like, I have never seen anybody do Arthur Godfrey. I have never seen anybody do Gary Moore. And in their day, they were making the money, they were doing the ad revenues, they were having the success, certainly Arthur Godfrey and Gary Moore on television, that a Jack Benny would have.
But more or less what happened was, in fact, he does do a little Arthur Godfrey, but not many people remember them because they didn't have that little gimmick. They didn't have the quick patter that Hope came into. They didn't have the nuances that Benny had becoming. The cheapskate, that's what really set it up and gave him a persona. Red Skelton just had so many characters he did that he became famous because of the great talent. These other people, Gary Moore was a wonderful host, but, it's like white bread. The other guys are more like bagels and lox, and he's white bread.
So even though you can be very successful as yourself, do you think, even in today's world, that you need to go outside of yourself, to be maybe remembered, stamped into something?
I think there are those people who need that. Yes, that's true. For me, performing is just something that is a joy. So whether they remember me or not, it doesn't make any difference. I'm having the time of my life.
But do you think a Jack Benny or a Bob Hope was conscious of that?
I think they were both doing the same thing. I think performing was something they loved and enjoyed, and they didn't look at it as a chore.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I think it's the same reason people remember Ed Sullivan,
yes,
but they don't remember an Arthur Godfrey or Gary Moore. Two others I want to touch on here. One I had never seen before, and I just saw this afternoon, and I thought was great, was Jimmy Durante.
Oh, you hadn't seen me
I
do
had
Jimmy
not seen
Durante?
you do Jimmy Durante. Where does he come from? Because he, aside from the nose, he did have a very distinct voice, but aside from the nose, he didn't have a big nuance like Jack Benny, I don't think.
Well, in the 50s, though, he was still, he was a guest on everybody's show.
Well, and the Gary Moore show, he was a regular on the Gary Moore show.
And then he also, was it the Colgate
Comedy Hour, yes.
Excuse me. And so he was outrageous, in his patterns and the characteristics of him.
He's an old vaudevillian, and that style that very few people were able to continue being a vaudeville star. That's what he did. He just kept his vaudevillian stage presence and persona, and he was able to sell it.
And he's lasted because of the strange quality of his voice. It's like a Louis Armstrong or somebody. And right now he's got a commercial for, I don't know what it is, but make someone happy. Make just someone happy. One of his hits. In his later years, he had several hits. And as time goes by and things like that, where in his earlier years, they were more the vaudeville type beat, and he wrote all those things like, you gotta start off each day with a song. And And then, of course, his voice is the voice in Frosty the Snowman.
Absolutely.
And the other day we were doing a show, and afterwards out in the lobby, some guy had brought his son, who was probably in his 20s, and he had said to his dad when I came out as Jimmy Durante, he says, well, who's that supposed to be? And then as soon as I sat down at the piano and started doing Frosty, he says, oh, that's the guy. You know?
It rung a bell. It rung a bell. We are going to take a quick break here. We're going to get back with Lynn Roberts, Chuck Carson. Lynn's going to perform a number for us here on the program, so you won't want to go anywhere. Stay with us.
From the Martha Douse Dance Studios, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year from our family to yours.
And I want to say the same thing. Merry, Merry Christmas. And you spell Merry Christmas M-A-R-Y. Without her, we would not have the baby Jesus.
Hey, Scott Spears back with you here on Scott Spears Now, joined in studio by Lynn Roberts, Chuck Carson, traveling the country right now with the Bob Hope Holiday Roadshow. Also some other great programs you'll want to catch them in when they come to a city near you. Lynn, we were talking before we went to break there about the characters you play, and you do Red Skelton, but I think people know why Red Skelton holds up and why he's still very funny. But when you become these characters, if I walked up to you and you were holding the golf club and you had the red jacket on and you had the hat on, would you be Bob Hope, or are you still you? Are you a method actor, I guess is what I want to say.
Well, I would be me unless you actually turned the switch.
Mm-hmm.
And now, one thing that I've realized, and I realized this, I was doing shows on the USS Midway in San Diego. That's the big aircraft carrier that's there permanently. And I was doing 3 weeks in a row for ladies from Mary Kay. They brought in 2,000 ladies each week. And the night of the show, after I did the show up on the flight deck, then I'd go down to the hangar deck to mingle. And I had so many of these ladies, and they would say, oh my gosh, you look just like Bob Hope. Even the nose. Well, my nose is not Bob Hope's nose.
No.
But I realized at that time that when I'm doing one of my characters, I actually visualize them for myself, what they look like and sound like as I'm doing it. And I realize that I project that to people, and I think telepathically they pick up the picture that they get hit with when they're talking to me, and they don't see me, they see the picture that I'm putting out. And that's why they would say, oh, even the same nose.
Yeah, I think you're very right about that. You said something in today's show that I didn't realize happened last year when you were here, that you ran into some of Bob Hope's relatives.
Yes.
Which is very interesting. Now, what was their feeling about you doing somebody they knew?
Well, that was what was such a thrill to me and so validating. I hope they're watching this. Because as you saw today, people were coming up to us and wanting to talk to us and congratulate us. Well, then I saw these ladies, and they were kind of holding back till their turn came, and one of them was wearing a Bob Hope ball cap with his cartoon logo on it, and she came up and showed me that, and then she put it on me, and I said, oh, did you bring that to me? And they said, yeah, that's for you, and we're Bob Hope's nieces. And then they started hugging me, and they said, oh, Bob would be so pleased to see what you're doing, and you just capture him so well, you know, so that was very validating to me, and that's why I was hoping they'd be back.
Have you ever ran into somebody who, whether it's a Jimmy Durante associate, Jack Benny family member, Red Skelton associate, who's written you a letter, come up to you, and found what you've done either really great or really not so great in their eyes?
Never had the not so great.
That's great.
Yeah, it really is. It was kind of cute today, though. This one little lady came up to me, and she says, oh, you were so wonderful. I just enjoyed everything you did. Says, have you been doing this for a long time? And I said, oh, yes, for a long time. She says, well, what's your real name? And I said, Lynn Roberts. And she says, never heard of you. And walked away.
Is that hard? I mean, as an actor,
Yeah.
I assume at one point, or maybe still, you want to be known for your own work, but you're known as these guys who did exist.
Mm-hmm.
Hard?
Well, I've done so many shows as myself and had standing ovations as me.
Mhm.
So now it's just the joy of entertaining. Now, there's a story in one of Bob Hope's, one of his books. I've got about 12 books about him. But he was with his writers, and they were in somewhere like Singapore or Shanghai or someplace, and they'd been talking about. He says, people were coming in wanting Bob's autographs, and he said, "Well, you want these guys' autographs?" And they said no. And he says, "Well, how do you guys feel that you're nobodies?" He said to his writers. Well, then later they're walking down the street in like Shanghai or Singapore, and nobody has known who Bob Hope was over there. And they come around a corner, and here comes a bunch of teenage girls, and they're holding up something like flyers or something. And Bob thought, oh, they want me. And they came running towards him, and they went right on by him, and they were going to a theater or something. They had free theater tickets or something. And Bob says, now I know how you guys feel. How do you stand it?
It's all relative.
Yeah.
It's all right. Exactly right. Chuck, what's the future? What's the future of this show? Where would you like to see it go? Does it change? Where do we go from here?
The future of the show is, right now, I think what you have to look at is your base audience changing. We know that this show appeals to World War II veterans, and those poor guys are passing at about 1,000 a day, I think. Then the next would be the Korean veterans and even Vietnam, where Bob was so staunch. Some of the Gulf War guys may remember him, but that's why I think right now we're kind of positioning ourselves in moving in this other show. We'll still be doing the Hope Show. We have a larger version called Bob and Bing's Road Show with Bing Crosby, and we've added Dorothy Lamour for our western cities. But I think adding George Burns and Bob Hope is a little broader base. I mean, Jack Benny is a little broader base, because even the people in their 40s remember who Benny and Burns are, because they had such staying power. So that show, I think, will have a little more staying power. But I think we've got at least 5 years left on the road shows before the audiences start to really pass away.
But then Chuck is working on doing Justin Bieber.
Really? Well, there you go. I can see it. I can see it. Is there a day, though, Chuck, when we really don't know who Bob Hope is anymore?
I don't think so. I think because of his association with the military, that will stay, and there are so many tributes. I don't know, those of you who live near here in Dayton at the United States Air Force Museum, which is wonderful, and you should make a visit there. There's a whole area dedicated to Bob Hope. So his name and his picture are going to be seen. So I think Hope is a lasting value.
When you live to be 100 years old like Bob Hope did and George Burns did, does it become a different person maybe somewhere down the road? I say because now I think you're doing Hope in his 50s, maybe 60s.
Yeah.
Do you ever at a point do Hope in his 80s? Because I think everybody now does George Burns in his 80s and 90s.
Well, but George was unique. George Burns became a movie star in his 80s.
Right.
In the Old God series. So that's where George got his longevity, and people recognize him from those days. Hope stopped making movies, when he was probably in his 60s were his last movies. So that in turn means that outside of him being recognized because of what he did for servicemen, I don't think he'll have the staying power of seeing an 80-year-old Bob Hope. If you remember looking, Bob changed dramatically as far as features once he got past 85.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if we can keep this going another 4 or 5 years, that would be great.
Well, obviously, your life goes on after that. What would
Yeah.
you like to do in 4 or 5 years?
He wants to do the Chuck Carson show.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Keep it going. Residuals in the pocket. Why not?
No, I'm going to come here and take over your job. No, I still am a musician and band leader and such, and and I can go out and just do a comedy show as myself, and so that would be very sufficient.
Well, I tell you, I do want to let the audience know before this episode ends that Lynn and Chuck will also be along on our Christmas special this year, which is going to be a lot of fun. featuring 40th Treasurer of the United States, Mary Ellen Withrow, George Cassotis, and Santa Claus, so you won't want to miss that. But before we're out of here on this episode, Lynn is going to sing a Bob Hope classic for us right after this final break. Back after this.
Hi, this is Ted Williams, the man with the God-given golden voice, and I'm inviting you to the second annual Charlie Fulton Fan Appreciation Weekend. It's all taking place WrestleMania weekend, April 6th and 7th at the American Legion Post 584, located on Olney Avenue in Marion. You can look forward to door prizes, raffles, and a grand prize drawing for a championship belt, along with a chance to get photos and pictures with well-known pro wrestling legend Charlie Fulton. Tickets are $5 and can be purchased at the door or by calling 740-802-4337. In addition, pizza and pop will be served at no additional charge. This event is sponsored in part by Buckeye Lanes, located at 126 South Prospect Street in Marion. Telephone number 740-387-8874, serving Marion for over 85 years. You can't miss the wrestling fun when it comes to Marion in April 2013. Don't miss it.
Perfect. Hey, Scott Spears back with you here on another episode of Scott Spears Now with two of my favorite people when they roll into town. Hopefully it'll be a yearly event. Look for them in 2013, if possible. Lynn Roberts and Chuck Carson with the Bob Hope Roadshow, Holiday Roadshow this year. During the break there, Chuck pointed out a very interesting fact of something he's been up to aside from the Bob Hope Roadshow. Chuck, what have you been doing?
Well, I have a company called Up in the Air Pictures, and that's a documentary film company specializing in aviation events. Based on that, there's a new Billy Crystal film that's going to open on Christmas Day called Parental Guidance. Part of that series was shot in Fresno. They needed some pickup shots at another location, so they hired me to be director for the second unit, the location shooting. So that was a great experience for me and a thrill. So I'm looking forward to, in fact, we're having a special screening on the 20th with us and some of the actors, but I'm looking forward to that.
Parental Guidance.
Yep.
Hey, sounds great. Billy
Yep.
Crystal, great actor.
Anything you see of Fresno in there, that's ours.
That's yours. Well, I tell you what, before we get on out of here of this episode, I do want to mention again that this year's Christmas episode of Scott Spears Now will also feature Lynn Roberts, Chuck Carson, 40th Treasurer of the United States, Mary Ellen Withrow, George Cassotis, Santa Claus, and a whole host of others. You won't want to miss that, so stay tuned for information on the 2012 Christmas Scott Spears Now special. But before we get out of here on this episode, it wouldn't be complete without hearing Lynn do a song in the voice of Bob Hope. He does many of them in the show, and it's a great part of the Bob Hope Holiday Roadshow and any of the other Bob Hope shows that he does. So without further ado, here is Lynn Roberts with a Bob Hope classic.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful. The fire is so delightful. Since we've no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. It doesn't show signs of stopping. I brought some corn for popping. The lights are turned way down low. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. When we finally kiss goodnight, how I hate going out in the storm. But if you really hold me tight, then all the way home I'll be warm. The fire is slowly dying. My dear, we're still goodbying. Long as you love me so, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Yes, sir, I want to tell you, there's nothing like walking down a lane and the snow coming down. You got a pretty girl on your arm. You can't beat it. When we finally kiss goodnight, how I hate going out in the storm. But if you really hold me tight, then all the way home I'll be warm. The fire is slowly dying. My dear, we're still goodbying. Long as you love me so, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Yes, sir.
Hey, that is great. I'm sure they're clapping at home in their living rooms. Remember, Lynn Roberts, Chuck Carson, Mary Ellen Withrow, George Casotis, Santa Claus, a whole host of others, Scott Spears, now Christmas special. Boy, this has been fun. We'll be back with more next week. Take care.